Time to learn how to swim, my daughter-in-law shouted with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. A few moments earlier, I had been standing near the railing of a luxury cruise ship, watching the turquoise waters of the Caribbean sparkle beneath the afternoon sun. At 68 years old, I thought I was enjoying one of the happiest trips of my life. Instead, that single sentence would become the beginning of a story I never imagined I would have to tell. My name is Helen Parker, and 3 days ago, my son Daniel invited me on what he called a special family cruise. He said it was a chance for all of us to reconnect after years of drifting apart. Since my husband passed away 4 years earlier, family gatherings had become less frequent. Daniel was busy with work. My granddaughter Emma was growing up fast. And my daughter-in-law Ashley always seemed to have a reason why plans needed to change. Still, when Daniel surprised me with the cruise tickets, I felt hopeful. Maybe this trip would bring us closer again. From the moment we boarded, Ashley acted differently than usual. She smiled more. She offered to carry my bags. She even insisted we take family photos together on the upper deck while the sun set behind us. It all felt almost too perfect, but I pushed that thought aside. I wanted to believe the best. On the second afternoon of the trip, the ship was hosting a family activity near one of the observation decks. Music played softly through hidden speakers. Children laughed nearby. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. I remember feeling peaceful for the first time in months. Then came Ashley's voice behind me. Cheerful. Light. Almost playful. Time to learn how to swim, she called out. The next few moments blurred together in my memory. Crew members reacted quickly, and before long I was safe and sitting in a quiet lounge wrapped in a warm blanket while medical staff checked on me. Everyone kept asking if I was all right. Ashley insisted it had been an accident. Daniel looked shocked and confused. I said very little. I simply watched. Years of life had taught me something important. The truth often reveals itself when people think they have nothing left to hide. Later that evening, after returning to my cabin, I reached up to touch the necklace I always wore. My hand froze. The necklace was gone. It had belonged to my late husband. I never took it off. As I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a cold feeling settled in my chest. The incident on the deck suddenly seemed far less important than the question now racing through my mind. Where had my necklace gone? And why did I have the feeling that losing it was never an accident? I barely slept that night. The gentle hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the walls of my cabin, while I sat beside the window watching the dark ocean slide past beneath a sky full of stars. My necklace had been with me for nearly 40 years. Richard had given it to me on our 20th wedding anniversary. To everyone else it looked like a simple gold pendant. To me it was the last piece of him I carried every day. I searched my cabin twice before sunrise. I checked every drawer, every pocket, every corner of my luggage. It was nowhere to be found. The next morning I went to guest services and reported the missing item. The young woman behind the desk was kind and promised to contact housekeeping. As she typed the report, she asked when I had last seen the necklace. The answer came immediately. Just before the incident on the observation deck. That realization settled heavily in my mind. After breakfast, Daniel stopped by my cabin. He looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. He apologized repeatedly for what had happened the previous afternoon. I told him I was fine. That was partly true. Physically, I felt fine. Emotionally, I felt something else entirely. I felt alert. Daniel explained that Ashley was devastated and embarrassed. According to him, she blamed herself for being careless. I listened quietly. When he finished speaking, I simply asked if he had seen my necklace. His expression changed instantly. He had not even known it was missing. By lunchtime, word had spread among several family members that I had lost something valuable. Ashley approached me near the buffet with a concerned smile. She asked whether the staff had found it yet. There was something rehearsed about the question, as if she had practiced it beforehand. I thanked her for asking and said no. For a brief moment, disappointment flashed across her face before the smile returned. Later that afternoon, I walked through one of the quieter corridors near the shopping promenade. As I passed a small seating area, I heard Ashley's voice coming from around the corner. She was speaking on the phone. I could not hear every word, but one sentence stopped me cold. Not yet, she said softly. I am still looking for it. A few seconds later, her footsteps moved away. I remained where I was, staring at the carpet beneath my feet. Looking for it. The words echoed in my mind. If my necklace had simply been lost, why did Ashley sound as though she expected to find something specific? For the first time since boarding the ship, I stopped wondering whether I was imagining things. Something was wrong, and deep down I knew the missing necklace was only the beginning. I spent the rest of that afternoon paying closer attention than anyone realized. One advantage of reaching 68 is that people often underestimate you. They assume you are distracted, fragile, or unaware. Ashley certainly seemed to think so. At dinner that evening, she laughed easily and chatted with other passengers as though nothing unusual had happened. Daniel appeared relieved that the tension from the previous day had faded. Emma excitedly talked about a dolphin excursion scheduled for the next morning. I smiled and listened, but my mind remained elsewhere. Several times I noticed Ashley checking her phone and glancing around the dining room. Each time someone approached our table, she seemed momentarily nervous before relaxing again. It was subtle, the kind of behavior most people would never notice. But once suspicion enters your mind, small details begin to stand out. After dinner, I decided to take a walk along one of the quieter decks. The evening air was warm, and the ocean reflected thousands of shimmering lights from the ship. As I rounded a corner near a private lounge area, I saw someone familiar sitting alone. It was a middle-aged woman named Susan Reynolds. We had briefly spoken the day before while waiting for an elevator. She recognized me immediately and waved me over. We exchanged polite conversation for a few minutes before her expression became serious. Helen, there is something I have been debating whether to tell you, she said carefully. My stomach tightened. Susan explained that she had been on the observation deck during the incident. She had not been close enough to hear every word, but she remembered seeing Ashley standing unusually near me for several minutes beforehand. Then she lowered her voice. What bothered me was not what happened afterward, she said. It was her reaction before anyone else noticed. She looked prepared. I remained silent. Susan quickly added that she could be mistaken. She did not want to accuse anyone unfairly. Still, her words echoed exactly what I had been feeling. Prepared. That was the same impression I could not shake. Before we parted ways, Susan mentioned one more thing. Earlier that afternoon she had seen Ashley speaking with a man near the jewelry shops on deck 6. According to Susan, the conversation looked tense. First I thought little of it. Then she mentioned something that made my pulse quicken. The man had been holding a small velvet pouch commonly used by jewelry stores. I thanked Susan and returned to my cabin. Once inside, I locked the door and sat quietly on the edge of my bed. My missing necklace. Ashley's strange phone call. The nervous behavior. The mysterious man with the velvet pouch. Individually, each detail meant very little. Together, they were beginning to form a picture. And for the first time I started to wonder whether Ashley had been searching for something far more valuable than a simple piece of jewelry. I sat there for nearly an hour, staring at the framed photograph on my nightstand. It showed Richard and me standing beside Lake Evergreen 20 years earlier. He was smiling, one arm around my shoulders, the sunlight reflecting off the gold pendant that now seemed to be at the center of everything. Most people believed the necklace was valuable because of the gold. They were wrong. The true value had always been hidden. Richard was a careful man. Before his health began to decline, he spent years organizing our finances and planning for the future. He trusted very few people with sensitive information, including members of our own family. One rainy afternoon, 6 months before he passed away, he placed the necklace in my hand and told me never to lose it. At the time I thought he was speaking emotionally. Now I realized he had been speaking practically. The following morning, I decided to revisit memories I had ignored for too long. Looking back, Ashley's interest in our finances had started years earlier. At first it seemed harmless. She would ask casual questions about investment accounts, property taxes, and retirement plans. Daniel often laughed and said she was simply organized. I believed him. Then came the requests. Suggestions that certain properties should be sold. Questions about trust documents. Comments about how complicated older financial arrangements could become. Each conversation seemed innocent on its own. Together they painted a different picture. As I thought through those memories, another detail surfaced. 3 months before the cruise, Ashley had asked whether I still wore Richard's necklace every day. The question had seemed random at the time. When I answered yes, she smiled and changed the subject. I remember feeling slightly puzzled, but I quickly forgot about it. Now I could not stop thinking about it. That afternoon, I left my cabin and made my way toward Deck 6. Susan's description of the man near the jewelry shops kept replaying in my mind. The shopping area was quieter than usual because many passengers were attending shore excursions. I wandered slowly past the storefronts until I noticed a small independent jewelry counter near the far end of the promenade. An older employee greeted me warmly. We spoke for several minutes about watches and souvenirs before I casually asked whether anyone had recently tried to sell a gold necklace. The woman hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "I cannot discuss customer business," she said politely. "But I can tell you that one of our staff members had an unusual conversation yesterday with a guest who seemed very interested in evaluating an older piece of jewelry." My pulse quickened. I thanked her and walked away. As I reached the end of the corridor, I glanced through a nearby window overlooking the ocean. Reflected faintly in the glass was Ashley. She was standing nearly 50 feet behind me watching. The moment our eyes met through the reflection, she turned and walked away. That evening, I chose not to confront Ashley. Experience had taught me that people reveal far more when they believe they are still in control. Instead, I returned to my cabin and opened the small leather journal where Richard used to keep important notes. Most of its pages contained ordinary reminders, maintenance schedules, and travel plans. Near the back, however, I found something that made me sit perfectly still. Tucked between 2 pages was a handwritten note addressed to me. I recognized Richard's neat handwriting immediately. The message was short. "If anything ever happens to the necklace, check the Evergreen Trust documents." My heart began to race. The Evergreen Trust was a family trust Richard had established years ago. I knew it existed, but he had always handled the details himself. Suddenly, Ashley's unusual interest in our finances, her questions about trust documents, and the disappearance of the necklace all seemed connected. The next morning, the ship docked at a beautiful island port. Most passengers hurried ashore to enjoy beaches, restaurants, and sightseeing tours. I remained on board. The quieter atmosphere gave me time to think. Around 10 o'clock, I visited the ship's business center. After several phone calls and a lengthy identity verification process, I managed to speak with Richard's longtime attorney, Michael Grayson. Michael had known our family for nearly 20 years. After listening carefully to my concerns, he became unusually serious. He asked whether anyone had recently shown interest in the Evergreen Trust. I told him about Ashley's repeated questions. There was a long pause on the line. Then Michael explained something Richard had never shared with the rest of the family. The necklace itself was not valuable because of its gold. Hidden within the pendant was a tiny access key connected to trust records and secure documentation. Without it, accessing certain files would become far more difficult. I thanked Michael and ended the call, my thoughts spinning. When I stepped outside the business center, I nearly stopped in my tracks. Ashley was standing across the corridor beside a decorative window overlooking the harbor. She smiled when she saw me. It was the same smile she always used when she wanted information. She casually asked how I had spent my morning. I answered just as casually. Then she asked whether I had made any progress finding the necklace. Again I said no. For a fraction of a second, relief appeared in her eyes. It vanished almost immediately, but I had seen it. Later that afternoon, while walking back toward my cabin, I found a folded note slipped beneath my door. There was no signature. Only one sentence. "If you want the truth about Ashley, come to Deck 7 tonight at 8 o'clock. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering who could have left it and what they knew. At 7:55 that evening, I stepped onto Deck 7 with the folded note tucked inside my jacket pocket. The upper deck was quiet. Most passengers were attending a theater performance on the other side of the ship. Soft music drifted through the evening air while the ocean stretched endlessly beyond the railings. For a moment, I wondered whether the note had been some kind of prank. Then I noticed a man standing near the far end of the deck. He appeared to be in his early 50s, dressed casually, with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with people professionally. When he saw me approaching, he nodded. "Mrs. Parker?" he asked. I hesitated before answering yes. He introduced himself as Thomas Bennett. The name meant nothing to me. Sensing my caution, he quickly explained that he worked as an independent financial consultant. More importantly, he said he had previously done contract work for a company connected to Ashley's former employer. My pulse quickened. Thomas seemed uncomfortable discussing the matter, as though he had spent days debating whether to speak at all. Finally, he told me why he had arranged the meeting. Several months earlier, Ashley had contacted individuals in his professional network asking unusual questions about family trusts, inherited assets, and methods of gaining financial control over restricted accounts. At the time, he thought little of it. Wealth planning questions were common. Then she became unusually interested in one specific topic: access credentials tied to physical objects rather than digital records. I immediately thought of the necklace. Thomas continued speaking quietly. According to him, Ashley had become convinced that certain trust documents could unlock access to substantial family assets. She believed those documents were connected to something Richard had left behind. What troubled Thomas most was not her curiosity. It was her urgency. She seemed determined to obtain information before anyone else could discover it. I listened without interrupting. Each new detail fit neatly beside the clues I had already gathered. When Thomas finished, he handed me a business card and apologized for not coming forward sooner. Before leaving, he offered one final piece of information. Ashley had recently attempted to verify ownership records connected to a property near Lake Evergreen. That caught my attention immediately. The Evergreen Trust. The same trust Richard had mentioned. After Thomas walked away, I remained alone on the deck, staring at the dark water below. The puzzle pieces were finally beginning to connect. Ashley had not been acting impulsively. She had been following a plan. A careful, patient plan that likely started long before this cruise ever began. As I returned to my cabin later that night, I found a message waiting on my phone. It was from Michael Grayson. The subject line contained only 4 words. "Call me immediately, Helen." Something told me the next piece of the truth was about to change everything. Back in my cabin, I immediately called Michael. It was nearly 10 o'clock, yet he answered on the first ring. His voice carried a level of urgency I had rarely heard before. After confirming that I was alone, he explained that he had spent the afternoon reviewing files connected to the Evergreen Trust. What he discovered made the situation far more serious than either of us had realized. Years earlier, Richard had structured the trust with several protective measures. Most beneficiaries could access information only after specific conditions were met. However, one section contained instructions tied directly to the authentication key, hidden within the necklace pendant. Without that key, certain records remained inaccessible. Michael paused before continuing. 2 weeks before the cruise began, someone had attempted to request copies of restricted trust documents. The request had been denied because the proper verification could not be provided. My mind immediately went to Ashley. Michael could not legally confirm the identity of the person who submitted the request, but he did not need to. We both understood what the implication was. After ending the call, I sat quietly beside the window. The ship moved smoothly through the dark water while distant lights from another vessel glowed on the horizon. For the first time, I stopped asking myself whether Ashley was involved. That question had already been answered. The only mystery that remained was how far she was willing to go to achieve her goal. The following morning, I joined the family for breakfast. Ashley appeared cheerful and relaxed. She chatted with Emma about an upcoming excursion and asked Daniel whether he wanted to attend a wine tasting event later that afternoon. Anyone watching her would have seen the picture of a devoted wife and mother. Yet once you know someone is hiding something, every smile begins to look different. Halfway through breakfast, Ashley casually mentioned Lake Evergreen. The comment seemed harmless. She said she had seen photographs online and wondered whether the property still belonged to the family. Daniel shrugged and said he had no idea. Then she turned toward me. "Maybe someday you should sell it," she said with a friendly laugh. "Managing property gets harder as people get older." I smiled politely. Inside, however, alarm bells were ringing. She was probing for information again, testing boundaries, measuring what I knew. Later that afternoon, I returned to my cabin and opened my laptop. If Ashley wanted access to the Evergreen Trust, I needed to understand exactly what she believed she was chasing. As I reviewed old files and correspondence, one document caught my attention immediately. It referenced an additional asset attached to the trust, something Richard had never discussed openly. The moment I read the details, I finally understood why Ashley had become so obsessed. She was not searching for a necklace. She was searching for a fortune. For several minutes, I simply stared at the document on my screen. Richard had always been a thoughtful planner, but even I had not fully understood the extent of what he had created. Hidden within the Evergreen Trust was a portfolio of land investments acquired decades earlier when property values around the lake were still modest. Over the years, those investments had grown dramatically. According to the most recent valuation, the assets were worth several $1 million. Suddenly, every strange conversation, every carefully worded question, and every suspicious action made perfect sense. Ashley was not interested in preserving family history. She was interested in controlling family wealth. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. The surprising part was not the value itself. The surprising part was that Richard had never mentioned it to Daniel. The trust documents explained why. He wanted the assets protected until future generations were mature enough to manage them responsibly. Emma was listed as the primary long-term beneficiary. My chest tightened as I read that detail. This was never about me. This was about Emma's future. Later that day, the ship hosted a family luncheon in one of the main dining rooms. The atmosphere seemed cheerful. Vacation photos were being shared. Passengers laughed. A piano played softly in the background. Yet beneath the pleasant surface, I noticed tension growing. Ashley seemed increasingly impatient. She checked her phone repeatedly and appeared distracted whenever conversations shifted toward finances or family history. At one point, she asked Daniel whether he remembered where Richard kept important records. Daniel looked puzzled and said he had no idea. The answer clearly frustrated her. That evening, something unexpected happened. Daniel knocked on my cabin door. The moment I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. He stepped inside and sat quietly near the window. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he admitted that Ashley had recently become obsessed with discussing inheritance matters. According to Daniel, she had spent months encouraging him to review trust records, property documents, and family accounts. He claimed he never paid much attention because he trusted both me and Richard completely. As he spoke, I could hear genuine confusion in his voice. For the first time during the entire trip, doubt had entered his mind. Before leaving, Daniel asked a question that lingered with me long after he walked out. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you think there is something about Ashley that I have been missing?" I did not answer immediately. Instead, I looked out at the dark ocean beyond the glass. The truth was finally moving toward the surface on its own. And sooner or later, Ashley was going to realize that her carefully built story was beginning to fall apart. The next morning, I made a decision. For days, I had been reacting to clues. Now it was time to create one of my own. After breakfast, I called Michael again and asked a very specific question. If someone believed the necklace granted access to the Evergreen Trust, what would they expect to find? Michael understood immediately. He explained that anyone who only knew part of the story would likely assume the key unlocked direct control over the trust assets. In reality, the system was far more complicated. Several legal safeguards prevented any single person from taking control. That information gave me an idea. Later that afternoon, I intentionally allowed a conversation to be overheard. While sitting in one of the ship's lounges, I spoke with Michael on speakerphone for a few moments. I kept my voice low but not low enough. Ashley happened to be seated nearby reading a magazine. I mentioned that I was still trying to recover something important before reviewing certain trust materials. The effect was immediate. Although she never looked up from her magazine, I noticed her hand stop moving across the page. That evening, Ashley became unusually attentive. She offered to bring me coffee. She asked whether I needed help organizing my cabin. She even suggested spending time together during the final days of the cruise. To anyone else, her behavior might have seemed kind. To me, it felt calculated. The more I appeared connected to the trust documents, the more interested she became. Meanwhile, Daniel continued struggling with his growing doubts. He stopped defending Ashley automatically. He started asking questions. Small questions at first. Why had she been so interested in family assets? Why had she repeatedly pressured him to locate old records? Why did she always seem to know when legal matters were discussed? The answers never seemed to satisfy him anymore. That night, something happened that pushed everything forward. Around 11 o'clock, I returned to my cabin after a late walk along the promenade deck. The hallway was quiet. Most passengers had already gone to bed. As I approached my door, I noticed it was slightly open. My heart skipped a beat. I knew I had locked it before leaving. I stepped inside carefully. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared stolen. Yet something felt different. Then I saw it. My desk drawer had been left partially open. Inside the drawer was a folder containing copies of several old family records. Someone had clearly been searching through them. I stood motionless for several seconds. Whoever entered my cabin had not found what they were looking for. But their mistake was even more valuable than any document. For the first time, I had proof that someone aboard this ship was becoming desperate. The following morning, I contacted guest services and quietly reported the incident. I did not accuse anyone. I simply explained that my cabin appeared to have been entered while I was away. The security officer listened carefully and promised to review access logs connected to the electronic door system. I thanked him and returned to the upper deck. The cruise was entering its final stretch. In 2 days we would return to port. Whatever was happening needed to happen soon. By lunchtime, Ashley seemed more restless than ever. She smiled often, but the smiles never lasted. She watched people when she thought they were not looking. She interrupted conversations whenever family finances were mentioned. Most importantly, she kept asking subtle questions about my plans after the cruise ended. At one point, she casually wondered whether I intended to meet with Michael once we returned home. I told her I had not decided yet. The answer appeared to disappoint her. That afternoon, Daniel approached me again. This time his expression carried something new. Concern. He explained that he had confronted Ashley about her repeated interest in inheritance matters. According to him, the conversation had become tense almost immediately. Ashley insisted she was only trying to help the family prepare for the future. Daniel wanted to believe her, but I could see the uncertainty growing inside him. Before leaving, he said something that stayed with me for the rest of the day. I feel like everyone knows something except me. For years, I had protected him from uncomfortable truths. Now I wondered whether that had been a mistake. Later that evening my phone rang. It was the ship's security office. The officer informed me that my cabin records had been reviewed. Someone had indeed entered while I was away. My pulse quickened as he continued. The electronic log showed a temporary staff access card had been used. Normally that would have explained everything. Except for one detail. The card had been reported missing earlier that same day. I thanked him and ended the call. The missing card changed everything. This was no longer a misunderstanding. Someone had deliberately created distance between themselves and their actions. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I sat alone near the observation deck and considered everything I had learned. The trust, the necklace, the hidden documents, the suspicious conversations, the search of my cabin. Every road led back to Ashley. Yet I still lacked one thing. Proof strong enough to expose the truth in front of everyone. Then my phone vibrated again. A new message had arrived from an unknown number. Attached was a photograph. The moment I opened it, my breath caught. Resting inside a familiar velvet pouch was Richard's missing necklace. For several seconds I stared at the photograph on my screen. The image was clear. There was no doubt. It was Richard's necklace. The same small scratch near the clasp. The same engraving hidden on the back of the pendant. Someone had found it. More importantly, someone wanted me to know they had found it. A second message arrived moments later. It contained only a location and a time. Deck 8. 9 o'clock. I spent the next hour considering my options. Then I called Michael, followed by the ship's security office. By the time evening arrived, a quiet plan was already in motion. At exactly 9 o'clock I stepped onto Deck 8. The area was nearly empty except for a few passengers enjoying the ocean view. Near the far railing stood the same man Susan had seen near the jewelry shops earlier in the voyage. As I approached, he removed a velvet pouch from his jacket pocket. Without a word, he handed it to me. Inside was the necklace. Relief washed through me, but only briefly. The man quickly explained that he worked as an independent appraiser. Several days earlier, a woman had approached him asking questions about the pendant's value and whether it might contain hidden compartments or authentication features. He had become suspicious when she seemed less interested in the jewelry itself than in what might be concealed inside it. After hearing discussions among passengers about a missing family heirloom, he realized the necklace likely belonged to me. Before leaving, he provided something even more important. He showed me a series of messages saved on his phone. The sender's name was visible: Ashley. The messages contained repeated requests for information about accessing records connected to inherited assets. They did not prove everything, but they connected Ashley directly to the missing necklace. Minutes later, security officers joined us and collected copies of the messages. The situation was finally moving beyond suspicion. Meanwhile, Daniel knew none of this. He believed the family was gathering later that night for the ship's farewell gala, one final celebration before returning home. Ashley believed the same thing. As I prepared for the evening, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and fastened Richard's necklace around my neck once again. For the first time since the cruise began, I felt calm. Not because the mystery had been solved, but because the truth no longer depended on my word alone. Witnesses existed. Records existed. Evidence existed. The gala ballroom slowly filled with guests dressed in their finest attire. Music played softly. Glasses sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Ashley smiled as she entered the room beside Daniel, completely unaware that by the end of the evening, every secret she had worked so hard to protect was about to come into the light. The evening unfolded exactly as I expected. Guests filled the ballroom, enjoying the final celebration of the voyage while the ship glided steadily toward home. Daniel and Ashley sat together near the center of the room. Emma laughed with a group of new friends she had made during the trip. For a few moments, everything appeared perfectly normal. Then Michael Grayson appeared on one of the large video screens positioned near the stage. Earlier that day, he had agreed to join by secure video call. The room gradually quieted as he introduced himself and explained his long relationship with our family. Daniel looked confused. Ashley looked concerned. Then Michael began presenting the facts. He explained the purpose of the Evergreen Trust. He explained Richard's wishes. He explained that the trust existed primarily to protect assets for future generations, especially Emma. One by one, the pieces were placed on the table. Security records confirmed that someone had used a missing access card to enter my cabin. Messages connected Ashley to inquiries about the necklace. Witnesses confirmed unusual attempts to obtain information about trust documents. Finally, the recovered necklace itself was presented, along with evidence showing that it had been taken and examined without my knowledge. No accusations were shouted. No dramatic scenes unfolded. The truth spoke for itself. Daniel sat motionless as the evidence accumulated. Ashley attempted to explain several details, but each explanation created new contradictions. By the end of the presentation, even she seemed to realize there was no way to untangle the web she had created. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument ever could. Later that night, Daniel asked to speak with me privately. We stood together on the same deck where so much of this story had begun. His eyes were filled with regret. He apologized for ignoring warning signs. He apologized for doubting me. Most of all, he apologized for allowing distance to grow between us. I listened quietly and accepted his apology. Life is too short to spend forever punishing those who are willing to learn from their mistakes. When the ship finally returned to port, everyone stepped off carrying different memories of the voyage. Ashley left facing consequences created by her own choices. Daniel left determined to rebuild trust. Emma left unaware of most of the details, exactly as Richard would have wanted. As for me, I returned home with Richard's necklace resting safely around my neck once again. The Evergreen Trust remained protected. Emma's future remained secure. And for the first time in years I felt at peace. Ashley wanted access to a fortune. What she never understood was that the most valuable thing Richard left behind was not money. It was wisdom. And wisdom has a way of revealing the truth, no matter how carefully someone tries to hide it.